And so, Andy, go ahead. I know you have news that Pete Alonso, you're expecting the signing to happen today, is it?
I'm expecting the signing to happen in March. No, I think it's somewhere between those two extremes that we just stated. Nobody seems in a hurry here. It does feel a lot like last year's in terms of pacing, but we will see. What's going to move this market is if somebody, any team, that's just somebody else, goes to that 5th year. And I think Alonso probably goes to the team that steps up. And if nobody steps up in terms of years, then we get a situation like last winter where perhaps the Mets and Alonso can work out a reunion on a shorter term. So this really does remind me, Steve, of the Diaz conversation that we just had, in the sense it's like a player feels justified in maybe wanting 5 years. A team values a player more around 3, and we'll see if a middle ground can be found. But in both cases, the Mets want the players, these guys who are their players, who thrive in their uniform and in their city, but not to the extent of necessarily having them on the roster in 2030. So that's the staring contest.
Yeah, look, and I have no added insight from, what Andy brings to all the insights.
Well,
Steve,
thank you,
and
Todd.
I both know that. So mine is more on an emotional side. I think this is something that the Mets want to get done. I think the Mets don't necessarily need to make it happen, but I think there is a strong urgency to try to make sure that Pete Alonso is back in a Mets uniform. Aside from the fact that he's a homegrown guy, he's thrived in New York. If he stays in a New York Mets uniform, he's going to own all the records that there are offensively. But I also think there's been a lot of talk about his defense, and that may be the thing that precludes. But look, run prevention is not really figuring in the 2 corner guys. It's defense up in the middle, and it's arms. Arms are what they really need for run prevention. So if the defense becomes a factor, I think it's just talking points. I think Pete Alonso needs to be here for his offense.
Yeah, and he has said it through Scott Boras, open to DHing, and so that at least a little bit would probably change the calculus in terms of how badly the Mets want to bring him back if he's willing to go off of first base at least part of the time. The one thing that I will say, though, when it comes to not just Pete Alonso, but Edwin Diaz and the way last offseason went, we're seeing a pattern here over the last couple of years with David Stearns, someone who clearly wants the players back, but is not going to negotiate against himself and is not worried about letting the process play out. And I think that's one of the nice aspects of having Steve Cohen ownership, where you can let the process play out, say, hey, go get the best offer, and then if we want to match that, go above it, we can. But so similarly to you, Andy, I don't necessarily see this resolving anytime soon. I lean much more heavily towards it going the way it went last year, where a resolution came after the new year, maybe deep into January or early February. If Alonso doesn't sign with the Mets, though, where do they go to fill that huge power gap?
Well, the timing could get tricky here, because if Alonso's out there in the timetable that we're suggesting, then what's going on with your Bellingers or your Kyle Schwarbers? And those are 2 players who I would not, by any stretch, rule out for the Mets. I think, again, timing-wise is a little tricky, and Bellinger's represented by the same agent as Alonso, and he plays first. So these things, to untangle them, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But in terms of replacing Alonso's production, if not being one of the few guys that can better it, I would not, as I said before, I would not rule out Schwarber. I know the Phillies are really in on him, but this is Schwarber's last chance at a long-term contract too. So if the Mets decide that that's a lane where they want to get aggressive, and I'm not saying that they will, but that's a place that could get interesting.
I think this is just an interesting conversation for this time of the year, honestly, because Kyle Schwarber is a guy that anybody would say, I'd love to have that guy in my uniform with a bat in his hand, 500 times in a season. And as a DH, certainly the Mets have not had a bona fide DH and a left-handed power guy that they can rely on in that role. So, yeah, is he a great fit? Yeah. Will he come to the Mets? I think that's less than likely.
It's probably a stretch.
Right? I think it's a bit of a stretch, and I think most likely he tries to stay in Philly if he can. And I think the timing is the interesting thing, because are the Mets going to go all in to steal him away from the Phillies when maybe Alonso's still out there? I doubt that.
I will say this, too, just because it is the fun conversation to have right now, and I agree with you. I think a lot of people expect that Schwarber will end up back with the Phillies. If the Mets swoop in and grab Kyle Schwarber, you could absolutely see Philly going and making a play then for Pete Alonso, right? Couldn't you see that happening?
That'd be a fun little swapperoo for next season for entertainment
right.
purposes. And, I would say, Steve, too, real quick, that Pete's been here a long time. Edwin's been here a long time. So there probably is some temptation, even though they love these guys, to see, like, well, we already traded Nimmo. What's a different culture look like? What's a different makeup of the clubhouse? So that's where that gets interesting to me, too.
Yeah, sure does.